Come on, there we go. So going back to our resource document, to the right of the title is the star. To the right of that, you will not have this file folder yet. What you will have instead is the Google Drive icon, which is a triangle. If you click on that, it will automatically add this document to your drive, and it will give you the option to organize it into folders if, like me, you have folders in your Google Drive, which look like this. Okay, so the icon looks a little bit like the triangle icon over here, except it's all gray, and it will have a little plus symbol in it. So that document is there for you. I also would like to just call out to everybody, because we know it can be hard to get the word out to everyone in the system such as large as ours. So this resource and all other resources that have been developed for this transition to distance learning are actually all located in one place on our intranet for the district. So if you go to your portal, there is a tile called Distance Learning Resources. Everybody's tiles load a little bit differently. So if you don't see that tile, you can click the search magnifying glass and just type distance, and then click on the tile in portal. That will bring you to our Distance Learning Hub. The home page has a document to kind of give you some overviews of successful practices in distance learning. At the bottom of the home page are some quick start guides for most of the tech tools that the majority of teachers will be using. The Google Classroom one will jump you to a location that takes you exactly to the same document I have already provided you. We might be joined by my cat, who has jumped up onto a high shelf and is now staring at me. So we'll see how that goes. If you go back up to the hub, if you are looking for additional trainings, we do have embedded support calendars. These do show up better in Chrome. Safari does not like them. But I also would like to mention to you that if you click on agenda, it is much easier for you to see all of the trainings that are being offered. And if you click on the training, it does give you both the link and the meeting ID. We also have training specifically for subject areas and grade bands. So today, for example, there are trainings for TK2, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 4th grade, AP science teachers, 6th grade self-contained. So we have several offerings today, for example, and those will also include information on how to join the meetings. And finally, the hub has information that is specific to grade bands. It starts with a technology resource document for each grade band, which is linked, and you can click on any of those links to get more information. You can also always open it in a new window and save it to your drive. And then beyond that one, you have a curriculum document that you can use to get support in specific subject areas at your grade band. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows where the resources are located, and we're going to jump into our Google Classroom right now. So in order, the first thing we're going to do is open up our Google Classroom, and we're going to click all the way over to the right on the settings gear. The settings gear has a very short section of settings that you can adjust for the gradebook in Google Classroom. Now, my Google Classrooms are all with teachers in the district, and we don't grade teachers for their participation in professional learning. So I have not set up the gradebook at all, and it still functions. I can still find my participants' work in there. I can give them feedback. I just didn't have a need to set up the gradebook because I'm not going to try to send these grades anywhere else. And I'm not going to try to use Google Classroom to communicate a grade to the participants in my online courses or my book studies. If you would like to use Google Classroom to communicate points or grades to students, you can actually choose to show them. Well, first of all, you can choose if you want it to be total points or weighted by category. Weighted by category is fairly common in secondary settings, for example. And then you can choose yes or no if you want to show the grade to students. So first of all, you have to have some kind of points or categories in there, and then you can choose to show the overall grade to students. This would show them a grade within Google Classroom. If I was still in the classroom, I would probably not choose to do that just because of the way my grading works. There would be a lot more information in Q than even Google Classroom had, and therefore there would be a mismatch between the two grades. But you can take a look at that and decide if you would like to show the grade to students. And even if you have Google Classroom calculate grades, you don't have to show that to the students. So you can let it do that work, and you can add grade categories. For example, some teachers like to have a thing that's something like homework, and they make it 25%, right? And then it says I have 75% remaining, so I need to keep going because it has to add up to 100. And then I have practice, and it's worth 25%. And then I have tests, and it's worth 50%, or whatever it is that teachers like want to do that works for their classes, right? And so now it's 100%. So I can have the Google Classroom Gradebook have weighted categories, or just add up total points, points for reading and literature, points for science, points for math, and so on, and still not choose to show that to the students from here if it doesn't make sense to do so. Okay, so I'm actually going to delete those categories now because I am not doing that with my teachers. Those are essentially the only settings you can do for the gradebook in Google Classroom. It's a very small section. So if you do make any changes, you need to hit save. And then the other place you will look at your students' work is usually, most of the time, you'll go to the gradebook. And I have already sent a message to this class to let them know that for this book study, I'm using their class as a model, and to ignore any random or illogical comments that come in with work they've submitted, or points that suddenly appear, because we don't usually do points. But once the gradebook loads, what you have are a few different things that the gradebook can tell you at a glance. Just by looking at it, you can see which students have had an assignment returned to them that was worth points, and how many points each student got. You can also see which assignments were returned to students that didn't have points. It was simply, I gave them feedback and there were no points. Now, I do have at least one participant in my book study here in our group today. And as I said, we aren't really doing points. This does not affect anyone's completion in the book study. I just changed it to points so I could live demonstrate how that works. So you can see if it's points, it means that there were points available for that assignment in Google Classroom, and that is determined by what you input as the teacher when you set up the assignment. And then it shows you how many points the students got. If there were no points, it was ungraded. You get a check mark when the teacher returns your work to the work to the student. You can also see which students have not yet completed the assignment. And so they don't have a check mark, or they don't have any points, they just have missing. And then, no judgment, you can see all the things that have been turned in that I have not yet had a chance to look at, right? So those things are still awaiting my review. Now, one of the ways you can also look at student work is, let's say, and this could happen a lot, especially in our situation right now, where some students didn't have access to technology for perhaps the first 2 weeks we were doing this, and they've just had a Chromebook issued to them. And they're really earnest learners and they wanted to do everything. And now they've hopped onto Google Classroom, and there've been some practice activities that, even though they won't affect their final grade in the class, they do want to catch up. So you might be all caught up and you've looked at all the work from all your students up to this point, but this one student just got their Chromebook yesterday and they plowed through a whole bunch of practice last night, and now they have several assignments awaiting your feedback. The gradebook might not be the easiest place to get to that. It's a little tedious to scroll through, and then when you click on an assignment, you have to find that student's work. So if one student has several assignments, it's much better to just click on that person's name in the list off to the left. So I can just pick a student, or in my case, one of my teachers. The first thing that loads is a complete list of everything, starting with things that have been returned to the student, things that were assigned. Oh yeah, it's not in any real order, never mind. And then more things that were returned. And then if there was anything missing, it would also show missing off to the right. On the left, and this is what will be more helpful to you, you can filter this whole huge list because it's everything that I've put into the classroom for the entire semester. You can filter it to see only those things that have been turned in and that I have not yet had a chance to look at. So for that student who just got their Chromebook and is catching up with all the practice materials that you have provided the classes, you could actually click on the student's name, click on turned in, and just have a list of that student's work that you can click on in order to provide feedback. So if I go here and I go to view details, it will now bring me to Deanna's work, and I can read her post here and determine, again, it's ungraded, so I can read and determine that that was an appropriate way to respond to that particular prompt. This was a question assignment. So this is one where the students are able to participate in a discussion board. And if I want to go to Deanna's answer again, so I can actually take a look at this. I can add a reply that the whole class can see. I can add a private comment that only Deanna can see. That's at the bottom. I know it's small on your screen. And then I can either click the 3 dots next to the word turned in and return this to her, or I can click the checkbox next to her name and click return and return this to her. And then it still gives me the option to add a private comment, right? Oh my goodness. There we go. Right? And then I can return this to her. So that can be a good way to get to the work for one student who has several assignments waiting in Google Classroom. And so what I'm doing now is I'm purposefully using the back button, because that's the fastest way to get back to that list of work for that one student. Or you go back to Google Classroom, you go back to grades, and you click on that student's name again in order to get back to that list. Because once you open up one of the assignments and grade it or give it feedback, it doesn't close it and return you to the list that you had. So again, once you're on the list, you'll probably want to click on the filter that says turned in, and that brings you to the assignments that you have yet to have a chance to give feedback on. So now if we go back out of that and click on Grading for Equity, go back to the Gradebook, let's take a look at giving feedback to students more than one at a time. Okay. All right, I'm gonna run out of things to give feedback on here. All right, so I'm gonna click on my grades, and I'm going to head over to where I have an assignment here where several people have turned it in, but I haven't yet had a chance to provide them their feedback. So instead of clicking on individual students here, and instead of clicking here, where I could actually click right here and take a look at Karina's submission or return it to her, I want to be able to do this for everybody. So I'm going to click at the top where the title is. And you'll see that what it's providing me now is the discussion thread, because this was another discussion board. On the right, on the left, I have a list of all of my students in a very particular order. The ones who've turned it in and that I have not yet given feedback to are on top. The ones who are missing are next. And the ones I have already given feedback to are at the bottom. Every time I give feedback to a student, that student's name moves to the bottom where it is grouped with those students whose work has been returned. So as I'm looking at this, I can look at all of their responses and either give them feedback one at a time by using the 3 dots next to turned in as I look at their responses, or I can spend some time in here reading responses, taking a look at the discussion thread replies, typing my own reply if I would like the whole class to see something that I am thinking and looking at and noticing. And then I can, as I've gone through and taken a look at all the work, I can very quickly provide all of the students at least the knowledge that I have seen their work, and if I was someone who was giving credit for it, that they're getting credit for it. By clicking turned in on the left, clicking that checkbox will automatically check every student who turned it in. You could selectively at this point uncheck one student if you need to, and then you can click return at the top. And if you would like to, you can add a private comment for participating in this discussion. and it will return that to everybody now. And you'll notice that you might have seen in the background what happened. It now has brought me up only to the students who have not yet submitted this assignment, and all of the others are under returned. This is nice because one of the things I can do is I can click on Krishna, who hasn't had a chance to do it yet, and I can send her a private comment just as a check-in. And I've done this before. Hey, just wanted to check in and make sure everything's okay. Is there anything I can do to help you? You know, you might have a student who's fallen behind and hasn't done the last 5 things, and you could actually say, yeah, I've noticed you seem to have had a hard time getting into Google Classroom. I'm hoping that I can help you complete the missing assignments or whatever you would like to do. So I did that simply by clicking on the name of the person to whom it was assigned so that I could add a private comment and click the send button to send that to those particular students. The other thing that I would like to show you is whenever you open any one assignment, and I see it here, but I'm going to open another assignment just so you see it again. There is a different settings gear that appears in the upper right corner. It's not the same settings gear that we looked at for all of Google Classroom. So I'm going to open another assignment. Once you click on it to open it, there's a settings gear off to the right. If you click on that, that is what will allow you to download a spreadsheet of either your entire gradebook, every score that's in it, or just the spreadsheet for this particular assignment. So again, to find that, you go to the gradebook and you click on any assignment. It doesn't matter which one it is. And then you click on the settings gear and you can download the entire gradebook to a CSV, or you can download just this assignment to a CSV, which is a comma separated values, which just means spreadsheet. The top option says copy all grades to Google Sheets. You can do that too. That would be the entire gradebook. The problem is if you are hoping to import them into Q, you're still going to have to export that Google Sheet into a CSV file like Microsoft Excel. So if you're planning to bulk upload scores from Google Classroom into Q, it would be better to choose the CSV than Google Sheets because you'll have an extra step if you choose Google Sheets. Okay. All right. Let's take a look now at an assignment where students have submitted attachments such as Google Docs, Google Drive, even Microsoft Word attachments. So we're going to take a look at an assignment where the teachers submitted work by providing a document to me. Okay. And the first way you know that is when you click on the assignment, you actually can see a little preview that tells you that there's some kind of document attached. The blue, if you can see that, I know it's smaller on your screen. The blue one is typically Google Docs, but it could also be Microsoft Word. This teacher actually submitted 2 attachments. One of them is a Google form for me to see the questions that she asked her learners. This teacher did turn it in, but not with an attachment. So they sent it to me as a share in Google Drive, which is different than attaching it to the assignment in Google Classroom. And then the teacher just came back to Google Classroom and marked it as done so that it wouldn't show up missing in her gradebook or in mine. I know that I just need to go to my shared with me in Google Drive and go get her assignment. So let's take a look at what happens if we click on one student's assignment. When we click on that student's assignment, it will load the doc. In this case, it's a document. It's a Google Doc. It will load the document, and you're going to see the document in the main screen on the left, turned in because it was turned in to me. If you click on that, it brings you to a list of all of the students in the class that you can sort by first name, by last name, or by status. So in my case, I like it by status because then it puts all the assignments that were turned in together, and it takes any that I've already given feedback to or that are missing and just kind of lumps them to the end. So you'll see in a minute that I'll be able to just use an arrow to toggle from Maria to Krishna to Laura to Marissa and look at their assignments, and they'll all be together. If I do last name or first name, it will go, when I toggle through there, I'll have Maria and Krishna's, but then Deanna, I've already looked at and returned it to her. And then I'll have one that's missing, and then I'll have Laura's. However, in talking with some teachers when I did this training yesterday, I think it was, you might find it useful to do by last name or first name if it's going to take you a couple of days to get through their work because they wrote something lengthier, and you want a way to remember where you left off when you come back in. Because if you do it by status, as we'll talk about in a little bit, you might be choosing not to return the work to each student the second you finish giving feedback, because some teachers prefer to look at all of the work in the class before any of the students receive the feedback. And if that's something you would like to do, this status area might be more difficult for you to remember where you left off unless you just wrote it on a post-it note or something. Whereas some teachers find it easier to sort either by first name or by last name and say, okay, I got all the way up to Taylor, so when I come back into this, I'm going to pick up after Taylor. So you have all of those options. So I'm going to put it back by status. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and go there. So if I go by status, I'm going to have it start with Maria. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the next one by just using the arrows. So I can look at this person's work. I'll show you how you give feedback in a second. When I'm done giving feedback, I just use the arrow. That brings me to the next person's assignment. When I'm done giving feedback, I use the arrow. It brings me to the next person's assignment. So it's fairly easy. Now, let's take a look at the ways in which you can give feedback. If the student submitted a Microsoft Word file or a Google Doc file, you can highlight a word. Sorry, it's not highlighting right now. You can highlight a word or a phrase, and a comment bubble will appear that wasn't there before that you can click on, and it will allow you to type a private comment that the student will see when they open this document next. It will be attached to the words that you highlighted. So whatever you highlighted will have a comment attached to it when they next open that document in their Google Drive or wherever it is stored. So that's one way you can give feedback. What is nice about this is that the feedback is attached to specific things that the student typed. On the right-hand side, you also have a private comment area where you can give overarching comments or any comments you want, but they will not be attached to any words or phrases in the document, and the student will only see them when they go back to Google Classroom to check the feedback that the teacher has left. So this is a little bit different. The student can see those comments, but they see them in Google Classroom as part of the feedback that kind of comes back with the assignment when you return it to them, and it is not attached to this document, in the sense that when they open the document, whether they open it in Google Drive or elsewhere, the comment you type here on the right will not appear anywhere on this document, if that makes sense. So the other feature that I'd like to show you is some teachers realize that they end up typing the same comments over and over and over and over again as they look at student work. So the nice thing is that Google Classroom actually provides you with a way to build your own comment bank so that you can just reuse comments that you have used before. When you look at an assignment in Google Classroom and you're in this view, and I'll explain why this one looks a little bit different in a minute. When you look at an assignment in this view, it always starts in what it calls grade or grading. And that's blue, that's where you're located now. That's where you could, if it did have points, you could put points in. I'll talk about the rubric in a minute, but if there was a rubric associated with it, you could indicate how many points for each section of the rubric. This is where you can add comments. That's the grading section. As a Google Doc, this one is a Google Doc, of quote, that's a chart. You can actually, again, put comments right within the document. Because this one is a Google Doc, I could also type directly in the document and it would suggest my additions or deletions to the student, and the student would have to accept or reject my suggestions. That's the default. You can turn that off and just edit the document directly if you wanted to, but it defaults to where you as the teacher are suggesting edits to the student. So anyway, back to the comments, and I was talking about how you can add a comment bank that hopefully would be helpful because you use these comments over and over again, and it might save you a little bit of time. So the way you get to the comment bank is by clicking on this icon, and then you have a variety of comments. These comments were added by me. They didn't come with Google Classroom. When I first opened the comment bank, it was empty and all it said was add to bank, right? And then I can actually add a new comment anytime I want. This is not that great a comment, but we'll just say that now. We'll put add. And now that is one of my comments. If I want to use one of these comments for this particular student's work, I can click the three dots, copy it, go back to grading, go to private comments, and paste. Unfortunately, that is the only way to do it. And I can add as many comments as I would like by doing the same thing and going back and pasting. Whether or not this is faster than you typing the comments pretty much depends on how quickly you type versus how quickly you're able to go back and forth between the comment bank, find the comment you want, copy it, move back to the commenting field and paste. So for many teachers, this will save time. Here are some things I wish it would do. I wish it would, when I click on the comment bank, I wish it would open up to the left here and leave this screen in place so that I could drag and drop the comments. It does not do that. Since it doesn't do that, the other thing I wish it would do is be predictive, meaning that if I started typing this, it would pop up all the comments that start with the word excellent and let me select one. It doesn't do that either. Fortunately, Google Classroom does have a way for you to tell its developers what features should be added or improved. Click on the question mark. There's always a question mark on every page in Google Classroom. It's usually in the lower left corner, but when you're looking at student work, it's in the right because your field for where you work as a teacher is primarily on the right. You click on that and say that you would like to report an issue or request a feature. And then up here, and I've already sent this, so they won't really accept it from me again, but up here you say, the comment bank should be drag and drop, or it should be predictive and let me choose and predict what comments I want based on the first letters I type. And it has a screenshot that I can include or turn off, and then I can send it. All changes in Google Classroom are driven by user feedback. They only change something when they get so many people requesting the same thing that it becomes apparent that it's a change they feel like they need to do, which means these changes are a popularity contest. So if you have a change you would like to see in Google Classroom, not only should you make the change, but you should tell all your teacher friends who use Google Classroom to go to the same place and make the same request as well. So that's how you add comments. And remember, there's a difference between the private comments, which are going to live in Google Classroom when the student goes to check their grade, versus the comments you put in the document itself, which will be attached to the words or phrases you highlighted, and which will show up when the student reopens the document. The next thing you might be curious about is the grade and rubric feature. So I kind of combined them in one assignment here for modeling purposes. You do not have to have a rubric in order to put a numerical score with an assignment. So if there's a numerical score, you can just put the numerical score where it says grade. And remember, again, you can return this to the student right now, or and it says it's not returned, so you've put a grade and I've saved it for you, but it's not returned to the student, you can click to the next student, who in this case already has a grade, but you can click to the next student and give them a grade, and so on. If you have associated a rubric with this assignment in Google Classroom when you created the assignment, or you went back afterwards and edited the assignment to add the rubric at a later point, and I will show you how to do that, the rubric will appear here, And you can actually just click to attach the associated score for each area. Notice that as I change what I click on, it's changing the total score. Okay. Now, when I hover over it, it will remind me that 4 points is exceeding standard, 3 is meeting, 2 is approaching, and 1 is not yet approaching. If I need to see the whole rubric, and this is not a true rubric, you would never write one like this, it's not even finished, then you can pop out the rubric to review what the criteria are and the descriptions for each criteria that determine the difference between a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. So you can pop it out and see it. You cannot create the rubric in this screen, and you cannot edit the rubric from this gradebook area, but you can mark scores using the rubric feature by just clicking on the cells that represent the number of points you wish to give the student for that particular area of the rubric. It also has a drop-down feature. If you prefer it that way, you could look at it that way. Okay. Notice that if you do the drop-down, it's actually going to include the descriptors that you included. Now, remember, I never finished typing this rubric, so it doesn't actually have any descriptors, but if I had had an actual list of the skills needed in order for this work to be exceeding in the area of content, that would be visible to me right here so that I could see it while I'm reviewing. Okay, now I'm actually going to undo all this because again, I try not to do points with our teacher work. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. Now, you might recall that I said you can look at a student's work and hit return, look at a student's work and hit return, or you can look at work, look at another student's work, give all their feedback and not return anything, right? Just keep looking and giving feedback and not returning. When you're ready to return, instead of hitting the return button, which would be for that one student, you actually click the pull down arrow and choose return multiple submissions. And then you can click here to select everybody who turned it in, or you can hand select the people to whom you want to return it. And no matter which one you pick, once you have some people selected, the return button will be here and you'll be able to return the work to those students. Okay. So next, let me hop back just so I can see the chat and and check on questions. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask before I move to how to create those rubrics and what the quiz assignment looks like when you create it in Google Classroom? Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hop back. Oh, there we go. If a student wants to. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. No, if a student wants to edit after submitting, what happens when they turn in an assignment to you? Again, this would be an attached thing like a Google Doc in particular, Google Docs, Google Slides, and Google Sheets. It basically turns off the editing for the student to give the teacher a chance to give feedback without worrying that the student is just still going to be in there changing things while the teacher is trying to read it. However, the student will see a button. If they open up the assignment again, they will see a button at the top of their work that says unsubmit. And they can kind of pull the assignment back from you to keep working on it, and then they can resubmit it when they are done editing. So that allows them to keep editing even though it initially turns the editing off. And you don't have to return it to them in order to give them, in order for them to be able to get access back to their document in order to edit it some more. And if the student does have suggestions and need to resubmit it to you to show that they've taken feedback and then improved their work, they do need to resubmit it to you. Although all of the assignments that students do are visible to you in real time. So even if, let me look at this again, let me go over to Google Classroom. All of these assignments are kind of in real time, like it's turned in and they can't edit anymore. But if there's also a Google Drive folder there's a Google Drive folder that is created for every one of your classes. And so any work that your students have even started, even if they never turned it into you, if it was attached to the assignment because, for example, you gave them a copy to start with when you created the assignment, you can go to the Google Drive folder, and that is always in your drive. It's called Classroom. You may have ignored it. Or if you haven't created any attachments in your classroom yet and your students haven't attached anything for work, you won't have it until it does that. But as soon as something is created for your classes, Google Classroom automatically creates a folder for every class. So I didn't do any of these. Google Classroom created all of it automatically. And so then I'm going to go down to Grading for Equity. It created this folder for me. I never even look at it. I've never used these folders, but this is a place you can go to see the work that students have done. So the only assignment where I have students who have attached work directly into Google Classroom is this one. And everybody's assignment is here and I can see it in real time, even if they've pulled it back out of the grading area of Google Classroom. So I can navigate to my drive, Classroom, the name of the Google Classroom, and then find the assignment. Again, this does need to be an assignment where you have kind of attached for them a doc to work with in Google Classroom, or where they have chosen to attach something as part of turning in the assignment. And because they've chosen to attach it, it will usually appear here as well. Okay. So that's a slight answer to your question in the sense that there are always ways for you to look at the work students are doing if they attached it to Google Classroom. The other type of assignment that I like to do with my book studies in particular is called takeaways. And I purposefully don't have them submit those into Google Classroom because I don't want them to have to go through the extra work of unsubmitting every time they want to continue their takeaway slide decks. So you'll see there's a whole bunch of assignments here called takeaways. And if I click on one, none of them have anything attached to it. And that's because I told the participants specifically to not submit it via Google Classroom, but to just share it with me so that they retained full access to that slide deck that they were working on for the entire duration of the course. And that's why they went ahead and came to Google Classroom to let me know they're done with their Chapter 5 takeaways, right? So I know I need to go in and look at them, but I can't find them here. So that's a little bit different. How do you get the assignment that was shared to me in Google Drive? Can the teacher put it into the assignment if the student didn't turn it in and only shared it in? You know, you can actually move any item from your Google Drive from any one folder in your drive to any other folder in your drive. They do recommend that you do not mess with the assignments that are automatically already here, because if you move them from here, it kind of breaks the connection with the gradebook in Google Classroom. But if a student submitted work to you, for example, if I wanted to, I could, I have them all organized, but sorry, I have to navigate to my thing. I could take all of their takeaway slide decks, which are organized, hold on, they're organized in my drive. Sorry, I haven't been in this folder for a little bit. Okay, and I can go into my book study folder. This is a folder I created. This is not the one that comes from Classroom. And then you see I have a folder that I made called Takeaway Slide Decks from Participants. So if I wanted to, I could grab that whole folder and move it into the Google Classroom folder if I wanted to, but I didn't see a need to do so. It doesn't really change anything for me. Either way, I'm still gonna have to go to my drive in order to open up these assignments, because these assignments aren't attached to anything in Google Classroom. They were shared with me directly. So I preferred to just keep them here with my information for the book study, as opposed to moving them into the Google Drive folder. But in theory, you could move them if you wanted to. Okay. All right, I'm gonna show you a couple more things now about the gradebook and grading in Google Classroom. The first thing I would like to do is go back And this time we're going to look at the actual creation of assignments. And we're going to create a new assignment. Now you have to give your assignment a title. Okay. You don't have to give it instructions if you don't want to, so that's a call you get to make. If you want your students to respond using a particular document that you've already created, almost like going to the copy machine, making a copy for students, and then having them be able to type their answers directly on their own individual copy. So let's say, none of these really look like one, but we're just going to pretend that this thing I had to type up really quickly this morning, we're going to pretend that's actually more of like a worksheet for students where there's questions and space for them to type their answers. So we add that here, and then it says students can view file. That's the default. If you need each student to have their own unique copy that they can write on or type on more correctly, you really need to change it not to edit, because that would allow every student in the class to work on the same exact copy of the document. Instead, you want to make a copy for each student. Just remember, you need to be done editing this document before you do this, because it's just like going to the copy machine, and you cannot change the document after you print it on the copy machine and expect the paper to change, right? So it's exactly the same here. It has to be completely done and in the final form you want it to be in before you choose make a copy for each student. It really is almost physically making a copy of what the assignment looks like right now. Over here, choose your class and classes or which students need it. Maybe change the points because Google Classroom thinks everything is 100 points, or change it to ungraded. Give it a due date. If you don't give it a due date, it will never show up as missing, but due date is optional. Assign it to a topic from one of your classes. And here is where you add the rubric. So you have a choice to create a rubric from scratch, reuse a rubric that you already created in this class or in a different class in Google Classroom, or you can import from Sheets. Now, I will say that I thought I knew what I was doing and I made a rubric in Google Sheets and I tried importing it in the live training a while ago and it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work, I think, but I have not had time yet to go back and experiment with my theory. Oh, and I must have opened a lot of things recently because now I'm not seeing it up here anymore. Anyway, the reason it did, oh, there it is. The reason it didn't work, and I'm sure it won't work today either, it says there was an error, is because when I created the rubric, I just put in points and descriptions, and I never put in any formulas in order for the spreadsheet to automatically do the math to add up the scores. Because as we saw in the gradebook, it will automatically do the math as you select the student's result for each part of the rubric. And I didn't build in any math. And I think that's why the import from spreadsheets didn't work. So I have to go back to that spreadsheet and then go figure out how to do the math formulas in there in the background, so that if I click in one cell, it knows to give it 4 points. If I click in another cell, it associates 3. If I click on the cell below it, it knows to add the first cell and the second cell to give a total score. So that's what the import from Sheets is. If that's complicated to you, don't worry. You don't have to know how to do formulas at all, because you can create a rubric right here in the editing screen. So use scoring means that it's going to add up points based on you clicking on areas of the rubric when the rubric is finished. I like descending order because I like to start with the highest and move to the lowest. So you give your criterion a title, and I'm being very vague, but I'm going to content, quality of the information. Oh my goodness. Information presented as it relates to the topic. I'm making this up. Don't consider this a model of a good rubric. I'm going to change this to 4. I'm going to give it the lettable title of exceeding standard. And then I'm going to describe exactly how a student sample would exceed standards compared to what the targeted standard was for this, so that it's clear to the students what exceeding actually looks like. Then I click the plus. I'm going to give it a 3. I'm going to call it meeting standards. And I'm going to describe the features of the work that is meeting standards. That is meeting standards. Yep. Sorry, it's going to get a little bit louder. Apparently the gardeners have arrived. Then I'm going to go to 2, and I'm going to call that approaching standards. So as you can see, I'm just filling this out, right? And I'm going to keep explaining, and I'm going to hit the 1, and I'm going to do not yet approaching standard, and I'm going to explain why and what that looks like. Then when I'm done, I'm going to add a criterion because most rubrics have more than one. And I might have a criterion for expression. And it's going to say, for example, quality and variety of vocabulary and sentence types, right? And sentence types. And then I'm going to do the same thing and add my points. So I'm going to do my 4, and it's going to be exceeding, and I would add a description, but today I'm not going to. And it's going to be meeting, and I'm going to do 2, and it's going to be approaching, and I'm going to do 1, and it's going to be not yet approaching. Okay, and then I can add more criterion if I'd like. Notice it has automatically indicated that there are now 8 total points possible. Hit save. You might want to change the point value here to match your rubric, right? And now there is a rubric attached to this. And that rubric again will show up when you are grading assignments in Google Classroom the way you saw earlier. Or I can delete that, okay? And I can reuse a rubric that I've already created. So it's going to look at the current class first. And if I know that one of these rubrics is the one I want, all I have to do is select it. But it will also let me pull down my list of classes and pick a rubric from another class and select that one. And I can open that one up and actually review it and make sure it's what I want. The one thing to recognize is that I can also edit that rubric so that if it was mostly right, but needed a couple of adjustments, I can go through here and adjust that rubric that I pulled in from the other class. And then I can save that rubric and use it with the assignment. Okay. So, with that, just as a quick review, we took a look at the settings area and the few settings that are available to you related to the gradebook itself. We looked at the grades and we noticed that we could click on an individual student and see all of that student's, everything that's been assigned to them, whether they've done it yet or not, but we can also filter it by just the things that were turned in, just the things that were returned with a grade, and just the things that are missing. So this student has one thing that I have not yet evaluated, and so that's something I can look at. We also found that when we go to the gradebook, we can click on any one assignment, and when we do, we will quickly have a list off to the left of the students for whom that assignment it'll start actually with all the ones that are turned in that you haven't reviewed yet. Then it will show you who's missing, and then it will show you who's already had the work returned to them. We noticed that we can jump to a student's work in particular if we would like to, and that we can actually change, we can return it directly from there if we would like, or we can hit multiple students. This assignment's already been graded, but we can hit multiple students and return all of their submissions at once. Finally, we looked at what it looks like when students attach something to Google Classroom and how you can toggle through all of their work, how you can organize their work to appear in a certain order, how you can provide a numeric grade or use the rubrics, add private comments, or use the comment bank, and how from here you can also return multiple students' submissions at once. We also learned the last thing is how to download the spreadsheet for any one assignment or for the entire gradebook by opening one assignment and clicking on the settings gear. Okay. The one thing I did say I would show you is that there is a special feature called a quiz assignment. You create that by going into classwork and create quiz assignment. And what that will do is it will automatically start with a blank quiz in Google Forms that is already set up to have automatic grading possible if you tell it what the right answers are. If you already have the Google form ready, you can delete this one and just go to your drive and get the Google form that you already had prepared for this particular activity. So I have, there we go. I could grab this one, put it here, delete the blank one. This is already set up for auto grading. I can give it a title. I can change the number of points and do all those things. There is no rubric. And then it will actually let you have a quiz assignment. If you have not yet created the form and you need to use the blank one, it just opens up as a blank form where it is ready for you to add questions. You can change the settings however you want. Once you have a question, you can add an answer key, and Google Classroom will automatically bring the score into the gradebook in Google Classroom unless you turn this off. If you have open-ended questions in the Google form, I do recommend that you go to the settings of the form, click on quizzes, and turn it off to release immediately after submission and change it to later after manual review. That way it does not bring in the scores or notify the students until you have had a chance to evaluate the open-ended responses. Okay, so that's just a quick bit of information about that special type of assignment, which does automatically bring scores into the gradebook if you give Google Classroom and Google Forms the ability to know what the right answers are for each question, and if you leave it turned on to import the grade into Google Classroom. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a look at these the last question that I have here. Oh, nope, I've already covered that one. Do we have any more questions before we close up for the morning? I'm reading one of the questions now. So because of the way things are rostered, this teacher has 4 different Spanish 1 Google Classrooms instead of only 2, because the 8th grade ones showed up on a different roster. And that used to happen when I had my combo classes with French 4 and then French AP. They met the same period, but they were on 2 different rosters. Unfortunately, I mean, technically, you could try giving the 8th graders the invite code to go into your high school one, actually. But when you try it, you can't really delete the middle school classes because every night they'll reappear at the sync because they are your classes. You would just kind of go into your Google Classroom and move their tiles down. And I'll show you how to do that. You can drag and drop them lower. So essentially what you would do is you would give them the join code for your high school class and let them join it. And it should work. I haven't tried it with students who are in completely different divisions, like middle school and high school. And then you go to your classes. And once you've done that, let's pretend this is one of your high school Spanish ones and this is another one. But this is one of the 8th grade classes. You can just click on the tile with one finger and then drag it lower down in your classes so it's kind of out of the way. That's not a great solution, but you can't really delete it because it will just come back. Since, as far as the computer knows, you're supposed to be teaching that class, so don't try to delete it. Any other questions? You're welcome. All right. We are at 9 o'clock. I do want to thank you for your time. I will probably actually replace the old recording with this one once it processes in Zoom. These recordings are a little bit long, so it takes a couple hours for it to finish processing. In the meantime, the old recording will still be available until I am able to replace it with this one. Really appreciate all of you coming out this morning. I know that it's been a challenge, and I'm so grateful for all the work you're doing for your learners, and I do hope that you take some time for yourselves next week during spring break to kind of recollect and relax and rejuvenate and so on. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day.